Are we truly recording, or are we just being recorded?
That's a very philosophical question. I'm sure someone like William of Baskerville uh, could help us answer this question.
Uh,
But I gotta say, we gotta center ourselves. We gotta really get ready. So I would like you to join me with a little bit of like meditative chanting to kind of get ready. So on the we're gonna do it. So ready and oh. Oh. Hello,
that was really
and
nice.
welcome to the most sacred podcast, Sad Boys Book Club, Episode 2, Vespers, in which Daniel tries to reconvert Dustin to Catholicism. They discuss a book of some merit, and many laughs are had along the way.
So, this might be a continuation of my thoughts from last week in a lot of ways.
It usually is.
Yeah, crazy how that works, I guess. But I find myself very conflicted with this book.
In what way?
Um, so I'm still engaged with some of the character moments and the general plot as a whole, but I can't get into the political subtext.
That's a shame. I really am enjoying the political subtext and like the sort of the religious discussions that happen over the course of the book. I think to me those are. I mean, I love the mystery and the character moments too, but I don't know. I just the whole thing is really doing it for me.
Yeah, I'm glad for you, but I'm like kind of 50% in, 50% out so far, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Well, I mean, it is a challenging book, and kind of like we were saying, there's a certain I guess knowledge gap that we kind of came in with that we might be missing some valuable context that could lead to some confusion.
Yeah, and I there are plenty of times where so far in this I'm reading it and my eyes just kind of glaze over because I'm just like, all right, and then we're gonna hear about how this man went and he was this religious follower of this sect, and so he had issues with this person with this sect, and then they fought, and I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm starting to learn that I don't personally have a vested interest in Catholic history, I guess, is what it comes down to, because at the end of the day, my thought process always just kind of comes down to all these guys are just assholes, and I don't think they truly believe or follow the tenets of Jesus Christ. They just say they do for their own personal benefits, either for like attempts at power grabbing or just to fulfill their own sick sadistic means. Because there are very few people in this book so far that I feel like I would go as far as to say, yeah, I'm pretty sure these people are actually practicing Catholics, and I feel like most of these people are just evil men that use religion as a means to an end. So, like, it just kind of always comes down to the same thing at the end of the day, where I'm just like, all right, these guys suck, and they use their religion as a power play. Which, I mean, shocker, I know, especially for this time period, especially with, like, the political underminings that constantly happen between the crown and the pope in this time period. So it's not like this is a shocker or anything, but I'm just kind of discovering that, like, yeah, I don't think I really am interested in it. It's just a bunch of dumb people doing dumb things.
See, I find that a little bit strange because I know you enjoy things like Warhammer 40K and Star Wars and that kind of thing. So I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways this is just a similar sort of thing, especially when you look at the Warhammer 40K comparison, wherein the use of religion is really more cynically deployed, and it is a little bit more about sort of like factional politics, but also a sort of like, you know, broader political games between different institutions and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's because of how this book is written, and it could be. I don't know if this is due to Echo's writing style or just due to the translation into English that this book went through. Because I know a translation can make or break a book. Um, so it could possibly be that, but like there, and there's and I don't remember if it's in. I think it's in day 3. There's a section where William is trying to like use an analogy for Adso to try and help him understand. And granted, even during the analogy, he's just like, I realize I'm really bad at these and I'm not getting my point across very well, so let me start over from the beginning. But it's a section like that, or a section like on day 4 when Adso is thinking about the woman he encounters during the night in day 3, to where it's just I keep getting the same information repeated over and over and over across like 4 or 5 pages, and it's just a loop. It's just I was thinking about this and this is what I came to. So then I continued to think about this and still came to the same conclusion. So I thought about it some more and came to the same conclusion. And I'm like, you're wasting pages here, dude. It reminds me of, if I know, I don't think you have, but if anybody has ever seen the show Justified, highly recommend it. Phenomenal show, phenomenal acting, and it features one of my favorite modern actors, Walton Goggins. Um, his character, Boyd Crowder, is very verbose, to put it one way. And there's a line, I think it's in like the final season, where one of the characters is talking to Boyd, and he's just like, Boyd Crowder, you really know how to say 40 words when only 4 are needed. And it's that's just kind of the feeling I'm getting from like I
See,
guess the
but
prose.
I have to really strenuously disagree here. I think that there's not a lot of wasted words. I think there's a lot of elaboration, yes, but I think a lot of it is there's a lot of depth and shades of meaning and elaboration that's going on. Yes, maybe some of these concepts can be summed up in like a sentence, a paragraph, but especially when we're dealing with these sort of like philosophical or more metaphysical type of ideas, I really think these kind of concepts and these sort of like the emotion and feeling that he had, for example, when he was thinking of the girl, for example. I think that was a very pivotal moment, for example, in his life. It was something that he experienced that just in a very real sense reordered his entire outlook on the world. So I don't know, something like that to me, bears some elaboration.
Yeah, and like it's not so much so that I don't find it realistic. Like him basically being stuck on it for the entirety of the 4th day, mentally is not at all unrealistic or just a shock or anything. It's just for me personally, and this is just a me thing, and I think it just kind of goes off of what I said last week as well. Is that I don't think I'm intellectually qualified to understand this book in the means in which Echo wanted it to be understood. So I think most of these complaints come down to, for lack of a better term, a skill issue. So yeah, I don't think it's unrealistic for his reaction to that, but it's just for me personally, I was just like, dude, I get it. Can we move on?
Well, and that's fair. Ultimately, these things are subjective, and so I think different people will come away from this book with different things. Whereas I think I am maybe not quite as cynical as you are in the respect of my understanding of several of these characters. I think a lot of them are rather cynical, like the abbot, like some of the figures that we meet that are from the papal, the papally associated people. I think a lot of those people are or someone like Salvatore. I think they are very cynical in their doctrines and what they do and what they consider acceptable. But I also think that a lot of these things are just representative of a society at an earlier stage of social development. I think there's that's just so there are things that they will do, say, and think that to us would seem unthinkable because they are being acted on by other forces that are either extremely weakened in our time or are just totally non-existent. So I think there's something to be said for that, but nevertheless, I could understand this one. I kind of knew going in was going to be a little bit of a, I don't want to say a reach per se because I don't necessarily want to agree with your assertion that what you don't like about the book is like a skill issue. I mean, maybe there's some things that you may not know, but again, those are applicable to me as well. I think some of these things just kind of come down to taste.
Sure, and I think it's about time, I guess, that we finally got a book that you and I at least have some modicum of disagreement on in the overall form. Which let me be clear here. I don't think this is a bad book. I think that it is a book that is a little outside of my personal tastes, which is fine. I think it's important that we still cover things that may not necessarily be something that you or I or a combination of the two of us don't like, because I feel like if it's just constantly us being like, I love this book. This book's great. This book's amazing. I love that it does this, and just constantly, praising it. It's nice to kind of get something that I feel like I have to be a little more. I don't want to say critical of, because it's hard for me to be critical of this book in a way that I guess doesn't feel like. Because okay, let me put it this way. This is going to be one of those books where in December, when we do our 2024 year in review, we're going to have the conversation about this one, and I'm going to say, if we're talking about like the writing quality, the subject matter, the overall just importance of this book and everything, it's an S tier, but my personal enjoyment is going to be substantially lower than that. It's going to be the same as I forgot what book I did that with last year. It might have been The Stranger. To where it's like, yeah, this book's like clearly, an S tier book, but my personal enjoyment is just not there. So my enjoyment level is going to be a lot lower than that, which, once again, I feel like is fine. But yeah, it does create an interesting experience in something like this where we're talking about it during the week, and you're just like, oh yeah, I'm loving it. It's picking up so much, and I'm sitting there. I get to yet another sext chapter, and I'm just like, all right, here we go again. All right, we're gonna talk about this, and then we're gonna just talk about and I'm just like, man, wasn't there dead bodies here? Weren't we doing something about that?
That's fair. There are a lot of digressions, and I think tolerance for digressions will determine to a large extent one's enjoyment with this book.
Yeah, and I think that might be part of it. I think it's just kind of I think it's partially mental. Like I came into it without the correct mentality, which is nobody's fault really. I have the opportunity to do the research on the book before I read it, but I choose to try and make myself go in as blind as possible, just to try, I guess, and get as raw of an opinion on it as possible. And this may not have been a book that was smart to do that with, which once again that's more on me than anything else. And let me be clear here. I don't completely hate this book. I don't think I'd go as far as to say that I'm loving it, but there is a lot that I do like, and there is a lot that I don't like either. It's very I like I said, I feel like I'm like kind of 50% in and 50% out. Because there are a lot of moments that I just really enjoy, and I'm reading these moments and I'm just like, this is fun. I'm enjoying these characters doing these things. But yeah, when they kind of get into their tangents and their flashbacks and their diatribes, I'm just kind of like, all right, can we just please get back to the plot? I feel like I'm constantly I feel like I'm stuck in the side quests when I just care about the main story,
That's fair. It's a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth type scenario.
I'll take your word for it.
A lot of people have complained that the game is a little too heavy on side quest and like open world stuff.
Oh, yeah, maybe one day I'll finish Remake and finally play Rebirth, but I'll just, in the meantime, I'll have to take your word for it.
In the interim, though, why don't we go ahead and get started on our recap?
Yeah, so, yeah, after our little opening spew of thoughts, where we left off last time, so, yeah, we had the two characters who came to this abbey. They're here for some sort of, for lack of a better term, summit between some of the emperor, his monks, and some of the followers of the papacy, because there's a lot of strife between the two, for lack of a better term. And upon coming to this abbey, our two characters have discovered a potential murder, possibly suicide, of one of the monks, and were asked by the abbot to investigate. And since starting their investigation, we have had another, looks like very much like a murder, and now one of the potential suspects has gone missing. And so now we're at the start of day 3, where they have found Berengar, the missing monk in question, not in his cell, and all that's there is a white, a scrap of white cloth that has been bloodied. So now there is even more so of a downcast, kind of tense atmosphere in the abbey.
Yeah, yeah, and as we were, as I guess when we left off last time, I think they went to the library the first time, right?
Yeah, so yeah, they've been to the library once. In the process, not in the library, but it was before they went to the library. William's glasses were stolen by someone who he suspects might be Berengar, and they found on what was his name, Venantius, the second
Yes.
the second person who died. They found a paper that had some like national treasure, invisible ink behind the Declaration of Independence, Zodiac text, and he's unable to really. He's still trying to figure out the. He has an idea of trying to break the code, but he hasn't quite figured it out yet. And it would be a lot easier if he had his glasses. But yeah, they've been to the library. They got lost in the labyrinthian nature of it, and they're planning on going back. And they have an idea of how they want to. I guess map it out, for lack of a better term, which we will see the fruition of that in this section, and I will say, very cool. Really enjoyed that bit. But in the meantime, yeah, so that's kind of where they're at in that regard as well. But yeah, so there's like we said, there's a bit of once again more kind of strain over the atmosphere of the abbey due to once again a third person missing, potentially murdered. We're not entirely sure yet. We have Adzo going to the kitchen to eat, and he finds Salvatore, who talks about his past. Just goes through like his history on how he eventually had made it to the abbey, and how
And during this time, they do kind of mention like a little bit of like the this is when they're talking about the Fraudolcino and the pseudo apostles, and it's kind of like a little bit of a meditation on how kind of cults will form among people that are dissatisfied by like societal status quo, that kind of thing.
yeah. And this is another situation where we see that there are monks in this abbey that have formally aligned themselves with sects that are currently seen as heretical. So it's kind of bringing into question, what's going on with this abbey, and why are these people who previously in their with their previous allegiances would have led to them being inquisited upon, they're now in a more favorable denomination that aligns more so. I think this one aligns with the emperor, this particular abbey.
Yeah, so I mean, they're still in like hot water with, I was gonna say with Rome, but I guess in this case with Avignon. But they're not. But they're like not really in a position where they would be like violently inquisited upon. However, it does add a level of like danger as we know that the emperor's envoy will be coming, with some inquisitors. So
Yeah,
it kind of adds a little bit of tension there.
yeah, and they're gonna be here tomorrow. At this point, they're gonna be here on day 4. Um, yeah, and these are things that they're not really open about. This is something that Adso and William just kind of find out through their investigations, and it's very much stressed by every monk they talk to about this, where it's like, hey, dude, like, I need you to keep this under wraps because I don't need this getting out to the Inquisitors because I don't, I'm scared. And it's like, yeah, understandable. And the good thing is that William and Adso might be one of the only people that I kind of believe at least understand and try to follow the tenets of Christianity because, they're all about doing what they feel is the right thing for God and not for their own personal gains. So each time this happens, most of the time it's William will be like, "Hey, dude, I'm just trying to solve the mystery and the murders here. Like, I don't care about what you've done before. Like, your sins aren't important. I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here to fix things." So, shout out to William for being a real one. Like, dude
He
rocks.
he is an awesome character. I just every time he does anything, I'm like, yeah, like that's the thing is at so I'm like, okay. Most of the time I'm like, yeah, he's good, or like, yeah, I understand where he's coming from, that kind of thing, relative to his time. But like every time William, he's just like, he's like the coolest dude in the 1300s.
Yeah, I'll put it this way, and this kind of goes back to the metaphor you used last week. Even if Obi-Wan is your favorite character, you don't watch Phantom Menace for Obi-Wan. You watch it for Qui-Gon.
That's yeah.
At least I do.
Obi-Wan still. Well, I mean, Obi-Wan still needs some seasoning. By the time he gets to episode 2, it's dudes rocking time. But in episode 1, he's still very much a Padawan, and I feel like that is true of the character of Adso. Is like, he's a learner, and usually, unless it's, well, I don't know. It's kind of like you were saying where with one of your reviews where you were, I think it was one of the Sanderson books where you were saying like, typically either the main character is not going to be your favorite character, that kind of thing. I think that's true in this case where Adso, he does kind of function with a dual purpose of like, he is the main character of sorts. He has his viewpoint that we proceed through the world, and he is kind of having something of a coming of age story that kind of takes us through as well. But at the same time, the guy that you're excited about, hearing what he has to do next is definitely William.
Well, I would argue that just because Adso is our narrator does not mean he's the main character. I think William is the main character, and Adso is the person by which we are exploring this character.
Could be. But I do think that there's like the digressions like that we will see, like the like his when he has sex with the girl.
Whoa,
when
spoilers!
I know, like massive spoilers there. And when he sees or reflects on watching the burning of the heretics and that kind of, I would have thought that William was the main character. But like seeing these things through his vantage point is kind of shifting me a little bit to thinking that Adso is probably going to ultimately be the main character.
Yeah, it might be like that in the end, but as of right now, I feel like all of this is just Adso trying to create context and, I guess parallels to build up William as opposed to build up himself.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, Adso goes to meet William. He's at the forge with Nicholas, who they're working together to try and replace his glasses. And William's quite upset about it. He's really frustrated because they're struggling to get it just right. And the only one that seems to be working, the only one that has the appropriate thickness, the only lens, is an emerald one. Which I think really is really he has a pretty funny line to where it's like something along the lines of he doesn't want to see the parchment of Venantius's notes look like a meadow.
Yeah.
It's a lot less funny when I say it.
No, I mean it's all of these things, especially when it's like using like older timey language. It's those things are always going to land better in context than when recounted on a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he tells William about kind of the situation, about his conversation with Salvatore, and this is kind of one of those. So there's a lot of, I don't want to say character growth, but at least character reflection with Adso in this section. We get a lot of day 3 specifically, and a decent amount of day 4. Is Adso trying to come to terms with the situation that surrounds him, both in the Abbey and in Italy as a whole, with the whole heretical. I don't want to quite go as far as say Inquisition that's going on, but I mean, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's not like an organized like the Spanish Inquisition, but there is a lot of inquisitorial activity, and we see that in a lot. Like we kind of glossed over it a little bit, but like when he's hearing the stories of the former heretics, and he's reflecting on his own experiences, like that's kind of creating like a very strong subplot, and that I think is going to be very influential to his character growth towards the end.
I'll tell you what, man. The last thing I'm expecting to happen in this book right now is the Spanish Inquisition.
Well, I guess we will see.
Yeah, so he has this whole a conversation with William where he's basically Adso's like, man, I just don't understand the difference between all of these heretical factions and like what makes them like this, and all of this, and William does his best to try to explain it, and his general thesis to it is that, as I understand it, please correct me if you think that it's something different. But basically that it's that most of the people that follow all of these different heretical sects, it's not so much that they're heretics, more so that they're just simple-minded people, and they are ostensibly, I don't want to say falling victim to these alternative ways of thought, but it's more so that you must judge them more so on their simplicity before you judge them on their heresy, because it's kind of that's the heresy is the symptom, and the disease, for lack of a better term, is their simplicity. Their simplicity. Is that? I
think that is a big chunk of it, but he also talks about at length, rather, that what's attracting these people is because they're basically living he is very clear-eyed about the fact that society, as they know it, is extraordinarily unequal, that these people are being asked, to do, a lot with basically, there's not a lot good that comes of being a medieval peasant. And so it's essentially fairly natural that they live these terrible, dreary, oppressed lives, that if something comes along that they could latch onto that can offer them some sort of hope for like a new life, and that's something that a couple of the heretics mentioned, or at least one, I think the cellarer, Remiglio or whatever his name was. He specifically says when he's talking about, when he was living in the heretic camp, he's something to the effect of like, but you really don't understand. That was the only time in my life that I've ever felt free, or something like that. And, it's just, so I think he's saying that it's not so much what the reformers themselves are preaching, but especially because the people themselves, as you're saying, they may not be savvy enough on doctrine and catechism and all of that to know like the full ins and outs of what is being proffered by these reformers. But what they're really wanting is some sort of societal change or societal growth. And then he kind of he kind of says that, and then he kind of says something to the effect of like, you know, that he's using his the logic and stuff. He's saying like that kind of thing will lead to the reforms, where one day an assembly of the people will be able to govern themselves. So it's kind of interesting, and it kind of squares with what I was saying last week, where I was saying William was kind of representative of the coming Enlightenment era, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess I get to the point that I think I was hopefully trying to get to, that you seem to have gotten to much better than I have, is that it's that these people are following an idea that promises them a better life, so they're subscribed to that, and it's so, not so much about the heresy, but so much so about the quality of life that is promised to them. And yeah, I know one of the bigger sticking points between a lot of these different factions is the concept of the poverty Jesus line of thinking, and it's that's causing a lot of strife between them, because it's like you have this sect that's just like, Jesus was poor, we should be poor, and you have what I can only assume are the people that are benefiting from this lower class through their religious subscription, for lack of a better term, that are just like, no, that is not a good way of thinking. We should punish people that want to try to bring everybody down to poverty, because that is clearly not what Jesus wanted, right?
Well, and they also mention during one of Adso's remembrances, where he talks about seeing a statue of Jesus wearing a crown and holding a bag of money, which
is just laughably stupid,
horrendous, and terribly gauche. This is a little bit of an aside, but I was just curious, what is the state of this debate in Christianity today? And a lot of what I saw is like they're kind of like, it's still around, but they're kind of like sublimating. So I'm seeing like these, often they're like writing into like these various theologians or religious figures, and they're like, oh, hello, so and so name. I was reading the Bible, and it was saying, and it is easier for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle, or the camel to pass through the eye of a needle, than a rich man to go to heaven. Should I relinquish my possessions? And the people, the religious authorities of today are kind of like,
you should relinquish them to me.
If you really want to, I can't say that you shouldn't do that, but I don't know if it's right for everyone. So it's interesting that kind of argument is still kind of, and also like, oh yeah, store your treasures in heaven and give us your money, that kind of thing.
I promise you, Jesus Christ came to me and said, yes, Mr. Copeland, you need that second private jet. And so I bought that second private jet, and I ask you, my congregation, to give me a third. And somehow it works.
So it's kind of interesting that because I just kind of Googled that, and it's just, and obviously Google's not what it once was, but I feel like it's interesting that contradiction was never fully addressed, but rather seems to have been sublimated over the years. So that's kind of an interesting idea. But
yeah.
Anyway, you can continue. I think we were talking about after William was like, and he was explaining why the heresy was happening.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Asa was just like, well, I just don't get it, and he's just like, well, here, let me explain. I think this is the point where this is the thing I mentioned earlier, where he was like, he was giving all of the analogies, and he's like, I'm bad at this, let me start over and try again, and he gives another one, and Adso's still just like, I don't really get it though.
Well, he is this. You have to remember, he's the son of a nobleman, who's like 18. So he's like a spoiled rich brat, you know.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, his heart is in the right place, but like relative to the other people, like he does not see like the order of the world as fundamentally evil because he is a young person who has directly benefited from it. So how, generally people like that are not immediately like ready to be like, oh wow, this is all terrible. There has to be some learning that happens before they can kind of learn and grasp the contradictions, and then decide what they're going to do from there.
yeah. And so at this point, William tells Adso that he figured out the Zodiac code. The translation is: the hand over the idol works on the first and the seventh of the four, which
That's a crazy thing to say.
yeah, and he doesn't quite get it either. But it's something that we'll have to just put in our back pocket for now, because he's pretty confident that this is going to lead to that. So like this whole thing, the whole like controversy, the whole, I guess, issues here, they're all bound to, like, it seemed to be bound to this book that everybody seems to be after. And William thinks that this is the riddle that will lead to said book. I forgot what it's called. It's some Latin.
The Finis Africae.
Okay, yeah. I thought it had something to do with like Africa. I couldn't remember, or at least in the title. I don't know what Africae, if that means Africa in Latin or not.
I think it is. Or maybe it's Africae. I don't know. But like,
All the same.
I think that just means like the end of Africa or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, then Abo, they have a conversation with Abo, who explains that this is where we learn that the Pope's envoys are going to be here tomorrow, and someone named Bernard Gui.
I think it's just Guy.
Guy?
Mm-hmm. And I think in the French, like Bernard Guy, but I think the other pronunciation, because like he has like a certain pronunciation of his name in Italian and one in French.
See, I thought this was Italian, so I was going with Gui, because it was like Guidolini.
I think
was like his full name or something.
Yeah. I think that's like it's Bernardo Guidolini, or like something like that. And then there's Bernard Guy. I think that's his name while he's in France.
Okay, well,
but either way,
enough.
it doesn't matter. You can pronounce it however you'd like.
So yeah, he's gonna be with them, and that really unsettles William, and he's like, oh wow, I thought he was retired, and I guess John the 22nd, our totally fair, benevolent Pope, called him out of retirement for this situation, and this dude
One last job.
I feel like calling Bernard a zealot would be underselling it, based on our description of him and what little interaction we get with him in day 4. Dude,
yeah, the man
sucks.
Yeah.
I feel like if we ever needed a clear and present villain in this book, it's gotta be this guy.
Yeah, it's he is very transparently evil. And we'll get into that a little bit once we see him, but like the characters react, in such a way that indicate that is very indicative of the massive problem he's going to be.
Yeah, especially given the history of some of the monks in this abbey and where their allegiances used to and possibly still lie. So that is gonna possibly be a problem where we might be seeing for the rest of the book at this point. But in the meantime, we have a mystery to solve. And so this is the point in which William comes up with the idea of how to possibly map out the library for future reference when they go back in there again. And I loved this. This was such a cool scene. I had a lot of fun reading it.
I was going to ask you, when if this was one of the scenes that you really enjoyed, and I'm glad you said that.
Yes, this is one of those things where I'm talking about. It's like the character moments and like the fun of the mystery. These are the parts that I'm like, that this is the part I'm in on. I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm here for. Basically, William uses math to create a map of the library just by walking around the outside of it, and it has to do with like how he basically gets into the mind of the architect, and using the what they know about it already, with how like they have the there's like the towers on each cardinal direction that are they're seven sided, right?
Heptagonal,
Okay, yeah,
right?
yeah, that would be seven, yes. Um, and then like using the knowledge of how that central room that they were in, that they kept getting back to, they kept looping around to in the first night that they were down there, the night before the previous night rather. Using that information, all of that, he's able to determine that the rooms have to be aligned like this, they have to go this way, they have to have this shape in them, and using like the information about the windows, how each room has windows, but the ones that don't, those are the exceptions, but we need to figure out the rule before we determine the exception. And he's talking this all through to Adso, who is drawing this on this piece of paper, or the tablet as they call it. He's just got his iPad Pro and his nice stylus, and he's just like drawing it out in his
Atso the iPad kid.
Yeah, he's just like, oh boy, I'm so glad we finally upgraded to Photoshop 14th Century Edition.
He has to minimize he gets bored and watches like the bouncy fruit things.
Yeah,
the dancing. Go ahead.
You won't believe where Adobe is based in this time period. They're a brick and mortar shop. So anyways, he draws this whole thing out, and he looks at it, and he's like, my God, or rather, my goodness, William, you have done it. How have you done that? And he's just like, it's the same thing with Brunellus, dude. Like, you just gotta think, man. Just use logic. It's totally fine. And it's really cool. Just using math and logic, figuring out the entire layout of this room without even being inside of it, and having been inside it previously and being completely lost. So their plan is they have the general layout. What they're missing now.
Sorry, I just want to throw this one last thing, and this kind of works in with the theme of the novel, the theme of like the use of symbol versus meaning. So we have like the rooms, and the order is unintelligible when you look at it from the perspective of I am in this room. Okay, I went to this room. They're not really able to get a clear picture until they contextualize it all like in a whole. Like the rooms, the order of the room seems meaningless, much like a lot of this stuff seems meaningless until you contextualize it within the broader themes, the broader meanings, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't know if we mentioned this in the previous episode, where each of the rooms has a name in Latin, and they couldn't quite figure out like why and what they were really like leading to. And so what their plan is going in next time is, because William has a theory that those names, and specifically the first letter of the names, correspond with some sort of secret message that has to do with why the books are ordered in the way that they are. So their plan is to go in next time and map out where the doors are located, where the windows are located, and the letter that corresponds to each of the rooms to try to figure out this potentially secret meaning. But yeah, just really fun character work here that progresses the plot and progresses the character.
See, after that, what was that when he Adso ran into Ubertino?
Not. That's not until tonight.
Okay.
That's after William goes down for the night.
Oh wait, no. I think he talks to him twice. I think there's the time when he talks about he asks about Fra Dolcino, and then we hear a little bit. Then we kind of go back through like the poverty movements and that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is. I guess that is technically what's next, because like he goes to talk to Salvatore. And this is the whole thing where he's talking about that's where he sees like Brunellus again, and Salvatore's talking about how Yeah, after this whole thing with discovering the mapping out the thing and all that, William's basically like, let's go get us some food and let's retire because I can't do anything tonight regardless without my glasses. I can't see without my glasses. So tonight's basically a wash, and he's just going to go ahead and rest. And so that's when Adso goes to Salvatore. They're talking about horses, and Salvatore's just like, "Yep, just rub some like liquid Viagra oil on the horse, and it'll run faster than Brunella's for like an hour." And it's like, all right, neat. But then man, okay, I don't know about you, but yeah. So Adso's like, "Hey, we're hungry, and I know that you're someone who has access to the kitchen. Is there anything we can have?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll get you some battered cheese." I don't know about you, but the way he described that battered cheese, even though I'm pretty confident it's probably like cheese curds or like, fried cheese in general, just the way that he described it sounded so delicious, and I'm like, man, I'd kill for some of those right now.
The food in this book sounds surprisingly good. Like when I think of like the medieval fare, I think most of the time of like something like really gross and bland. But most of the food in this book sounds really good.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if we had the opportunity to taste the food that these people ate at the time, even some of the more like higher end quality food. I'm pretty confident it probably still won't compare, because I can't imagine, especially in the 14th century in Europe, they had a huge variety of spices to use. So it probably would still be bland for us, given that we have access to a whole world's worth of spices nowadays.
That's fair. But the food still sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not very well versed with my European and Eastern Asian history, but I know a lot of spices came from like Eastern Asian cultures, and even a lot of them came from like Central American cultures too, right?
I mean, all over the world, there's
Well,
a lot
yeah.
of from like South America and a lot of it though South Asia, like that. That's why they wanted to go to India later, is because they wanted to cut out the middleman for the spice trade and that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
because it was the whole point was finding the passage across from west to east to get to open up the spice trail or whatever it was
The
called.
spice must flow.
Yeah, yeah, right. Lisan al Gaib. Um, check out the Sad Boys book review of Dune on our YouTube channel if you want to hear more about my thoughts on that. Anyways, so yeah, I can't imagine that they had a huge amount of access to spices. So I imagine to our palate, where we have access to all of these spices as readily as just walking to the nearest grocery store, it probably would still taste very bland to us, because I doubt they use some of the spices that are just very common to us on a day-to-day basis nowadays.
That's fair.
Anyways, with that tangent aside, so yeah, it's at this point after they eat and William retires. That's when, because Adso has kept hearing about Fra Dolcino. Is it Dolcino or Dolcino?
I think it's Dolcino because it's Italian.
Yeah. He keeps hearing about Fra Dolcino, and he has no idea who this dude is. And every time he asks somebody, they either get scared and walk away, or they just kind of brush it off as like, it's not really something you need to know. Just know that he kind of sucked. So he wants to track down Ubertino to ask about him, and he finds him praying, and he asks him about it, and Ubertino gives him the story. The way that Adso, because at first he's just like, this is a horrible story, and I don't know why you would need to really know this. And Adso is basically just like, hey man, I'm trying to become like a super mega priest. I want to be awesome and cool and knowledgeable and be like super awesome with God. And Ubertino's like, you have a point. And if I teach you, there's lessons to be learned here that you might be able to use to help, the stray sheep not fall into the pitfalls of Fra Dolcino. So I will tell you the story of Fra Dolcino. And I'm going to level with you. I have forgotten some of the finer details of it. I remember that it's basically... I remember thinking that this reminded me of something like... oh god, what's his... I always forget his name. Oh goodness. The Waco guy.
David Koresh.
David Koresh. It kind of reminds me of the new Davidians a little bit on this Fra Dolcino thing about how
it reminded me a little bit more of Jim Jones.
I could see that too.
The People's Temple, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can definitely find some similarities with Jonestown as well, but I guess it's mostly kind of what happened in the end that kind of gives me the New Davidians kind of comparison. Because with Jonestown, that was the whole drink the Flavor Aid. It wasn't Kool Aid, by the way; it was Flavor Aid. Um, but that was the whole thing how that ended. But with the New Davidians, it was the whole Waco incident with the uh, not the FDA. What were they called?
The ATF.
The ATF. Thank you. Um, but like the biggest parts I remember is basically he was just all about. He was also kind of a hippie, right? Because it was all about like free love and shit, right?
I think that was. I don't know about the branch Davidians.
No, I'm talking about
Davidians,
Dolcino.
whatever. Dolcino, yes, which is a little bit more like Jonestown.
Yeah, then he had like I think this was where was it Margaret? Margaret was in this story. This is where she came from because I know
Yes.
there was a mention to her beginning in the beginning when William talked with Ubertino and he talked about how Margaret was like a saintly woman or something like that. But the biggest things I remember from it because a lot of this I'm sorry it just kind of blended together for me was like there was that whole thing where he was trying to preach. I think he was preaching the poverty of Christ thing. And then like basically,
Well, that was. I'll just summarize this bit really because I remember pretty well.
Go for it.
So it was Ubertino started. He started before actually Fra Dolcino, and he talked about a figure known as Gerardo Segarelli, who he was the one who popularized that slogan, penitenziagate. I don't know. Essentially, it's just like Italian for repent, and that it's something that Salvatore, for example, has said several times. And so it's Gerardo. He was the first that kind of came into conflict with the church because he was of course, wanted to preach the poverty of Christ, but he also took it a step further, and he was wanting to return to a more traditional Christian understanding of not necessarily having any personal property, but holding all things in common, which, as you might remember, was the way of the apostles in the Book of Acts. So anyway, they kind of started off that way. And over time, they began to be accused of being beggars and vagabonds. And then, as things kind of heated up, eventually, Gerardo got heated up on the stake, and that was basically the end of that particular movement. Is after he got killed, they kind of like drifted apart. And then this young man who had come from roughly the same area, who had probably been influenced by Gerardo, was named Fra Dolcino, and then he kind of preached the same sort of like principles of absolute poverty, and then he kind of like threw in the free love element, which I'm sure was a huge no to the Catholic Church at the time.
I bet it went over well with the people though, specifically the men.
Sure. I'm sure, but and so Dolcino. Was preaching these things, and he's and as this conversation is happening, Adso is pointing out and all these things that he was preaching, or in both Gerardo and now in Dolcino, things that they were teaching that were good, or things that Ubertino has previously voiced himself, and so there's like this kind of underlying tension as the conversation goes along, where Ubertino becomes more and more vexed by the questions, which call into question the hypocrisy not just of him personally, but the church writ large. And so it's essentially Ubertino just kind of gets a little miffed, and he kind of starts cutting it shorter, and he's essentially like, at any rate, Dolcino was burned at the stake, and Margaret was also burned at the stake, and that was the end of their movement. And then he kind of goes into his diatribe about, and this is something that kind of, to talk again about hypocrisy, we see Ubertino who is constantly railing against women, both as just like a concept and as individuals. That he refers to them in a very derogatory sense as being vessels of sin, and that's not how William necessarily views them, but it draws a big contrast in like different ways, and it's because he is so consumed by his lust that he is external rather than following as Jesus said, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. He is instead externalizing the cause for his sin to women, and so he talks about Margaret, and he says that she was this big problem and was essentially the downfall of Dolcino. And then he kind of like stares at the statue of the Virgin Mary, and he kind of gets like, he gets weird with it. I'm gonna be real here. Like if he's if he really finds Jesus so like important and worshipful and like all these things in his life, it gets really weird when he's like openly kind of like sublimating his lust by staring at depictions of his mother. So it just kind of shows that he himself is a rather twisted individual.
Yeah, look at the statue of the Virgin Mary. Look how the hand of the child cups her breast. And I'm like, dude, you need to like jerk off or something. Like, you gotta take care of this.
It was actually quite uncomfortable. Like, whenever I'm around Ubertino, and I want him to, or not, I'm around. Whenever Adso is around Ubertino, I want Adso to distance himself from him. It's like it's giving me like vibes of like the Catholic abuse scandals. I'm like, run, Adso, run.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the biggest things that we really can look at from this section that we cover this week is the absolute misogyny that's going on in I think we can probably safely say Christianity at this point as a whole, because I feel like Ubertino is not the odd man out in his pure misogyny.
No, he is definitely not. He is a bad example, particularly bad example of it, but he is also a product of a deeply misogynistic culture. Specifically, the Catholic Church, especially that's like taking it up another level.
If I remember correctly, this is the conversation. I think it's Ubertino. That's the one that this during the whole anti-woman tirade that he goes on. I think this is when he brings up about how God made Adam through nature, and but then he made Eve through Adam's rib, and like it always strikes me as kind of strange how and I don't remember if it's right here or if it's later on with another character, maybe Bernard, talking about how women are just ostensibly conduits of sin, and they're sinful creatures, and like you said earlier, they're of the devil, like they're conduits of the devil and all of this, and it's like, so okay, going off of the creation story, right? You've got God, he's creating everything, he creates Adam, and he's like, I need a companion for you, so he takes a rib and he creates Eve, and Eve is supposed to be the perfect companion to Adam. I feel like a lot of, just a slight tangent, I feel like a lot of this maybe not a lot, at least some of the misogyny that comes from a lot of Christian belief systems comes from blaming Eve for eating the apple of Eden, or after being tempted by the serpent. Like, it's like, oh, it's her fault that all of this happened, so it's women's fault that mortal sin exists, and that we no longer have paradise. I'm wondering if that is one of the root causes of the massive amount of misogyny in Christianity. I'm not sure. Maybe might be worth thinking about.
Well, I could see that as being a thing, but it's kind of to me a sort of chicken or egg thing. I think what is likely possible, because it's not like the people of the Bronze Age were spectacular, were like more enlightened, so I wouldn't be surprised if the fall, the Eve came down to like a certain misogynistic mindset from them. So it may just be like a game of telephone essentially. It's just kind of like passed down throughout the ages and generations, and in this case between religions and their offshoots.
Yeah, I just find it really crazy that um, they seem to hate women so much and consider them as pieces of the devil, when according to their own Bible, Eve is a creation of God based off the image of Adam. So like you're basically calling one of God's creations satanic, which just
Yeah, and
feels oxymoronic to me.
and that's where the hypocrisy, or one of the areas where the hypocrisy comes in, and it's just and it also it shows a disconnection, not just from the reality as we can understand it and as we understand it today. It also represents a break with, and this happened fairly early on as Christianity, as religion kind of consolidated itself and consolidated power, becoming kind of woven into the Roman imperial framework. But there was quite a bit of, in the early days of Christianity, there was a lot of there were women that were in relatively leadership roles, and we see from Jesus's interaction with women, there is not a there is it was, especially relative to the time, there were, or maybe not especially, but relative to the time, it's there is a certain liberatory or at least egalitarian aspect to that is kind of like dialed back in, and we see in some of the later books, specifically, I believe it is some of the Pauline epistles that kind of try to wind that back a little bit, and I think that became part of the larger consensus of the church moving forward. But I think for a long time, Christianity was seen as a very, from the perspective of some of the Romans, like a religion for women and slaves, essentially, because of its relatively egalitarian message, at least as it was understood at the time.
Yeah. And so, with that, Adso leaves Ubertino a little more confused than when he came, but he decides that he wants to go to the library himself, so he goes by himself. And it's at this point in time, using the story of Fra Docino, he remembers a time where he witnessed a heretic burning. His name was like Michael. I don't remember if he had like a title, Michael of something, but it was just someone named Michael, for all intents and purposes.
Brother Michael, I think, was all that it was that we got.
Yeah, and he was someone who had the audacity to say that Jesus was poor, and he called the Pope heretical for suggesting otherwise. And because he had the absolute audacity to call Jesus poor and call the Pope a liar for saying otherwise, he was burned at the stake for it. Um,
I gotta say, the
love and
story
tolerance.
is like we don't need to get into the whole thing, but like Brother Michael comes off very very good in that story. I think he's just very courageous, and I don't know. I found it kind of beautiful in a way. Obviously, I think that it's not really. I don't know that it is good to allow yourself to be burned at the stake for something like that, but there's just something that was kind of, I found remarkable about his strength of conviction, and just his willingness to sacrifice, that is just kind of foreign to a lot of like contemporary thought and contemporary behavior. So it's just, there was something that was very very evocative about that whole moment that I found quite interesting.
Yeah. I'm honestly starting to wonder Echo's feelings towards religion, because even though this is a historical fiction, so he's using the actual things that were going on at the time as like a backdrop here, he's remarkably critical of Christianity.
Well, he is a, or he was, he's passed away now. But he was a left wing person.
Uh, yeah, because like this does not paint Catholicism in a good light at all. The only characters that are shown to be in any facet of good are the people that dare to question the tenets that are being espoused as the standard, the status quo of Catholicism at this time.
Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah, he's in the library. He's looking around. He's getting high off the room juice again, and having visions of the Virgin Mary, the whore of Babylon, and it's the whole. He's just thinking about women and things, and just getting into the weeds of all of the things that he's been talking about, and so he eventually leaves, and he's like a little hungry, right? He wants to go to the kitchen to like get something to eat real quick, try and like nick some maybe some battered cheese again or something.
Yeah.
And he sees a light, so he blows out his torch, but or his lantern rather, and he's already been noticed though, so the other torch gets blown out, and he sees somebody running away, but they've left behind a woman, and he sees the woman, and she sees him, and she's like. She speaks in a different dialect. It's the local dialect, so he doesn't really understand it. But what he does pick up on, what little he can figure out, is she's basically just like, "You're handsome," and then they fuck.
Well, she was also like very like, I think she was pretty like she was very afraid at first. Something happened that caused her to have a very negative reaction. But then when she sees Adso, and then he kind of like tries to talk to her, she determines that he's not there to like hurt her or do something bad to her. That's when that kind of begins to happen. This sort of very
The coital
raw
interaction.
physical attraction between the two of them.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but for me, this came out of nowhere. The last thing I was expecting was to get a 14th century sex scene.
Yeah, I was not expecting that in the slightest.
So yeah, very strange. And so they kind of pass out together on the floor of the kitchen, and then he wakes up later and she's gone, and he sees that she left behind a giant heart wrapped up, and it like makes him pass out. He's like, "Oh my god!" And he faints, and then like William wakes him up. He wakes him up the next morning, and he confesses to him. He's just like, "Oh, I got my pee a little wet last night, and I gotta admit it was kind of rad." And William's like, "Yeah, well, temptations, it's understandable, and like, shit happens, but just God will forgive you. It's all good. Just try not to do it again, all right? Once again, proving that William is a real one."
And I will say that in terms of the experience of Adso, it was like a very almost like transcendent experience.
Dare I say it was a religious experience.
It really was, and so he was. So this is like, I think this is. I don't want to give this part short shrift, but it's just like because this is a very formative moment in like it like Adso is like he is now kind of seeing at this moment. He's seeing beyond what he has been taught in his like seminarial kind of lessons, and so it's kind of he's really expanding his understanding of the world and of the relationship between people in a very concrete way. But also, I think one of the things that William also mentions, is he enjoins him. He's like, well, I mean, you did this, and according to your vows, you should not have done that. However, be mindful of this, and so that you can be more lenient and forgiving towards other sinners that you will have to encounter and take confessions of in your role as a priest. So
yeah,
and that's kind of what you were saying. And so it's I don't know, it's just another moment of even though I don't necessarily agree with the whole thing but relative to his time, he's being incredibly gracious.
It does feel like, relatively speaking, William is a remarkably liberally minded Catholic, which is, it feels like those just couldn't exist back then, yet somehow he does.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't know how I don't know. Maybe there were guys like that, but it's just I feel like he definitely represents the symbol of encroaching modernity that is about to begin to come into the fore. You know, like we as this where we're at in the story, we're like pre like Black Death, and like the Black Death will set kind of like will set off a sort of ongoing cascading series of crises that will kind of eventually bring us to the Renaissance and modernity. So I feel like he kind of represents a forerunner to all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, just, you know. Adso had a good night. But yeah, William posits that like that's it's an ox heart that he found, and he thinks that what's going on is he thinks that Salvatore is the one that brought the woman, and that the cellarer has a sort of deal with the local women to where Salvatore brings them up. The cellarer, whose name it's like Remigio.
Yeah, I think I called him Remiglio, but I think his name is Remigio or something like that.
Well, yeah, Remigio, whatever it is. Remigio. Either way, the cellarer. He has sex with the women and then gives them food, and that's something that William
not
posits.
really even food, like entrails, like a heart. You know, not
yeah,
like
right.
normal food.
Here's just like straight muscle. Have fun. So yeah, that's the idea that William posits is probably what's going on. And so like they're kind of talking, and they find that the really old guy again. And they're chatting with him a little.
Leonardo.
Yeah. And I don't remember how, but something happens where Adso mentions that they haven't actually checked the baths yet for Berengar. And they decide, because like I think William says that, or is either William or Alenardo says that he saw the people that check the area. They just kind of glanced into the door and then just kind of moved on yesterday morning. So William and Adso decide to check the baths, and there they find Berengar's body, who very clearly drowned and has been sitting there for over a day. So,
yeah, I think it was something like that.
Yeah, so mystery solved there. There's Berengar. He's dead. So they bring him to Severnus. I don't know why I struggle with this name so much. Severinus.
I think I pronounce it Severinus, but
Severinus. Okay, I'll probably just call him something wrong next week too. Severinus. They bring him to him, and if you remember, he's the herbologist, the herbalist.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Yep, this dude clearly died by drowning." But then he points out, he's like, "Hey, this was on Vernatius, Venantius." But I didn't think much of it. But now it's here on Berengar as well. But his fingers are black, and so he thinks that maybe he touched something
his tongue
that was
also black.
Well, yeah, but at first they were positing that maybe he touched something that was poisonous, and then William's like, "Hey, can you open his mouth?" And he sees his tongue is black as well.
Oh yeah.
And he's just like, yeah, maybe he ingested something poisonous. And this is kind of one of those situations that I kind of referenced at the beginning, where they like kind of keep talking in circles. It feels like where like this whole bit where William was just like, he touched something, but it's possible that he didn't touch something that was poisonous, but to touch something that was poisonous, he had to have touched something that was poisonous. Therefore, for it to be poisonous for him to touch it, he would have had to touch it, and it would have been poisonous. And I'm like, what? He just I don't know. That whole bit where he just kind of keeps going in some sort of logic loop about him touching something poisonous, it just I don't know. That bit kind of lost me. But
yeah, I don't remember what exactly, but I didn't. I don't remember being thrown by that, but I also don't remember the particulars of it.
I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm looking at it with a little more of a critical eye than you are, so things like that do stick out to me. I'm not sure, but yeah, he asks Severinus, William does, if there was anything missing from his shelf, any of his like herbs or poisons or whatever, And Severinus mentions that there was a really bad hurricane a couple years ago, and he had this really dangerous poison that someone had given him. And after that really bad hurricane, where his apprentice had left the door open, uh, after the mess that was created from it, he never found it. So he just kind of assumed that it had been destroyed and was just lost in the mess that he had to clean up later. So William thinks maybe that apprentice stole it, and he's like, I mean, I didn't think so based on his opinion, based on his general temperament and his what kind of person he was. But he also died a couple years ago, so I don't really know if that's really possible. But then William's like, maybe it was taken before that, and maybe someone staged it to look like as such. And Severinus is like, well, now that you mention it, um, it did seem a little odd the amount of wreckage there was, and yeah, I didn't check it every day. I kept it hidden behind these pots. And William's like, well, who all have you told about this? And he's like, well, obviously the abbot had to know. And I think he said that maybe Malachi was aware of it. Am I remembering that right?
I
Or am I
yes,
mixing
I
up
think
with?
so.
It's either that or I'm mixing it up with when they talk to the cellarer later and he brings up Malachi. But basically, there's a couple people that know, and William's like, it's possible that they stole it and they've just been kind of stewing over this murderous plan for years now, which is a terrifying thought. And in walks Malachi, who needs to speak with Severinus, but then he sees William and Atso, and he's like, it's basically the Grandpa Simpson meme where he walks in the door, puts his hat on, turns around, grabs the hat, and walks back out the door.
That's funny.
Yeah, so William, they go and they confront they confront Salvatore, who basically confirms William's theory about the women, and he's just like, yeah, I used to also no, yeah, so he begs them not to basically do anything, like don't say anything, and this is a situation where William's like, I'm not here to judge you, I'm just trying to solve the mystery here. So then Salvatore goes, and then they go and they confront the cellarer about it, and they kind of play this kind of this beat around the bush kind of cat and mouse game, where they're just kind of they're talking about it without talking about it, and using just kind of like insinuations and inflections to really kind of, but they both know the game that they're playing. And eventually the cellarer's just like, okay, I tire of these games, like, yeah, you know, I know what you're here about, and yeah, I am doing that. I used to be a follower of Dolcino, and I once you got a taste of that forbidden fruit, that hunger never goes away. So yeah, I do it. What of it, man? And he admits that he found Venantius's body in the kitchen that previous night, because he was going to go meet with one of those unlucky ladies from the village, and he fled from the scene because he realized if he would have brought attention to it, his game would have been up, and he would have been caught. So he was just like, I'll just let someone else find the body. It's fine. He meets with Salvatore and cancels the whole rendezvous. And then I think he even says, like, if your little squire there would have been a few minutes later, he would have found me instead of Salvatore. And I don't think Adso would have loved how he would have found the cellarer at that point, because he probably would have been hiding the salami, if you will. But yeah, it's about I think, yeah, this is when he William kind of like suggests that Malachi might be a suspect, but the cellarer's quick to say no, because he's like, he owes me, I owe him a favor, and I don't think he would do it. But yeah, meanwhile, during all of this, Adso, just throughout this entire day, just at different points throughout the day, I'm just gonna, I want to kind of skim over this, unless you really want to go into more detail. We kind of talked about it at the start, but I really want to kind of punch through day 4 pretty quickly here. But throughout the entire day, Adso is having a major kind of internal struggle with himself about the woman that he had sex with the night before, and he's having, like, it's not so much a crisis of faith or even a crisis of character, it's just dealing with that lust that has now been awakened in him, and like how to deal with it, and how to what's the word I'm looking for here, not contend that with his fate, but how to reconcile that with his faith and his position. Yeah. So that's something that's kind of going on throughout the day. And he's just constantly thinking back on it, and thinking about her, and thinking about what he needs to do and all that. So that's something that's just kind of going on in the background, something to keep in mind. Um, at this point, Severinus, he found the stolen glasses of Williams in Berengar's outfit, which proves that Berengar was the one that stole them and that they were chasing when they were in the edificium the other night. Um, and so, but also at this exact same time, Nicholas comes up and he's just like, "I've done it! I've completed your replacement glasses." And he sees William wearing the original ones, and he's just like, "Oh." It has a real kind of like Charlie Brown moment. I could hear the piano playing and everything.
Yes.
And then
I felt
William,
bad for him then.
yeah, but William, being an absolute bro, was just like, "Haha, now I have two pairs of glasses, and dare I say, Nicholas, yours are better, so I will have my old ones as a replacement pair." Really just kind of brightens up his mood after feeling like he just wasted all that time. So, once again, William kind of rules.
Absolutely.
Um, so yeah, and then him and Adzo kind of talk, and we have this whole bit about how books reference books, and so like it's through books that we can learn about other books. And Adzo's just like, "Wow, I never thought of that." And it's like, yeah, that's how references work, believe it or not, sources and all that.
Well, you have to understand like one thing that we're seeing here is also kind of like the birth, not just of like scholarship is kind of still in its infancy as scholarship as we understand it, because like if you remember back to how the library was ordered, the way the library was ordered would make no sense whatsoever or nobody would think to order it in that way. So it's the sort of we're kind of seeing the infancy of the ideas of scholarship. So that's kind of something else that's going on. That's why he's like, what? Books can talk about more than just the natural world. They can also talk about other books,
Yeah. Yeah, at this point, William, he goes to lie down for a while, and we get this weird, I don't know, it was weird for me at least, bit where Adso he goes and joins people. I think Salvatore is one of the ones that are like hunting for truffles. They're like using the pigs to sniff them out and then like dig them up. And like, I don't know how important it is to go into this with the whole truffle thing, but I don't know, just kind of another one of those kind of tangents that it kind of goes off on, and it's a bit about language and how words can have different meanings in different languages. But pretty soon,
which I think is important. I think that's something. I mean, we don't need to go into it, but it's essentially like there's a confusion of like truffle versus der Teufel, which is in a German word that means, I think, the devil essentially. And so it's kind of like it's playing with shades of meaning. So that's just something I think that we haven't had like a big like hiding in plain sight reversal like that yet. But I think that's something that it's kind of gesturing towards that we will see later.
Yeah, it might be a bit of foreshadowing that comes up later, but yeah. And then so now some of the other the first group of people, they're like from they're of the Emperor's group, right? Like Michael and Jerome.
Yeah.
They're Emperor's men.
Michael and Jerome, those guys are on the side. They may not necessarily be like strictly of the Emperor, although they are aligned in the sense that they are part of the clique that is preaching the poverty of the church and the poverty of Jesus, that kind of thing.
Okay. So we have our first arrivals for this whole summit. It's a dude named Michael. Is like Michael of like Cesena or something like that, and Jerome of Caffa, among I think a couple of others. And this is a group that's aligned more so with like William, and they have a luncheon, the three of them and Ubertino, and they're talking about the situation that is presented to them and what this kind of summit is about. And they're just kind of like, that Pope guy kind of sucks. Yep, not really that great. What a douche. And they're just kind of like, they're a little worried about Bernard a little bit. And then after their little lunch, that's when Bernard and the Pope envoys arrive, and Bernard and William have their own little like, if you don't know, it just sounds like a somewhat maybe a little stiff but pleasant by the books greeting. But if you do know, it's ostensibly a already a barbed verbal match between the two of them because they have a history. And then Bernard, he's just basically he decides that he's going to take control of the investigation, which is what they were aware of. That's what William and the Abbot had talked about the previous day. So that's going to start happening. They talk to Alenardo again, Edzo and William, and he talks once again about how about the apocalypse and how this is all following, all these murders are following the
Which the Apocalypse of St. John is also known in the modern context as the Book of Revelations.
Yeah. He's talking about the seven trumpets again, and how the Berengar matches the third trumpet, and now they got to wait for the fourth. He also mentions that he was going to be the next librarian, but he was passed up for Malachi, and he's not really fond of that. So yeah, that's interesting. I guess there might be a little bit of political machinations that have led to the promotions to librarian than what was supposed to be before. So then it's now basically nighttime. Adso's by himself. He runs into Salvatore, who's holding a bundle. Or no, I think it's like he sees Salvatore, so he chases after him. And Salvatore's like, yeah, I got a black cat, and I'm going to kill it, and I'm going to cut its eyes out, and I'm going to put them in these black hen eggs, and then I'm going to have a girl spit on them, and that means I'm going to be pretty, and the girls are going to want to have sex with me. And I'm like,
specifically
all right,
the girl that he knows that Edzo had met.
Yeah, he kind of toys around with it, and he's just like, no, it's not going to be her. It's going to be a prettier girl. But we know the dude's jealous. I just find that so funny though. He's like, none of the girls will have sex with me because I'm ugly, so I'm going to do this whole ritual where I'm going to kill a cat, put its eyes in eggs, and have a girl spit on him. It sounds like the silliest thing.
It sounds insane.
It does. It sounds completely insane. But I kind of laughed at that. I'm like, really? Like you're. All right, dude. So then after that,
I felt bad for the cat.
Oh yeah, me too. But I don't feel as bad for it because of. We'll get to it. Well, I'll just say the cat's in. There's only an implication of danger. The cat's not actually in danger. So William and Adso go back to the labyrinth. They're doing their whole mapping out. They're reading books and having a grand old time. And they discover through the letters that they all each of the rooms spell out a word in Latin that points to a different region, like Hibernia, Hispania, Gallia, Roma, and then they find
Hibernia being Ireland, Hispania being the Spain, Gallia being France, and Roma being Rome.
Believe it or not, Rome. Yeah. And then they also find one, and they're like in cardinal directions as well. I think Hibernia was in the west.
Yes.
Which kind of generally, from Italy, Ireland would be northwest, I guess. But, yeah.
I think it's the westernmost part of, maybe not continent. You know what I mean?
Of Europe.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm looking at the map just now. Spain goes out a little further west than I thought.
Oh, okay.
But it's still, I think it's slightly further west at its westmost than any other part of Europe. At least, if we're not counting Iceland and all that.
Yeah, and so they discover that the rooms in the south, they spell Leonis. I think that's right. Which is basically, it's Africa and the Middle East. And so William thinks that that's where the Finis Africae should be, and how so with each of these towers, they have their outlying rooms, and they have the heptagonal room in the center, and that's where the central point of the rooms are for the things. And they discover that the heptagonal room in the center of the south tower is completely sealed up. So William thinks that it has been sealed up, and there must be a secret entrance to get into the room, and that's where the Finis Africae should be. But they have to try to figure out where that secret entrance must be. So they just continue on their reading. William is reading his own thing, and Adso is reading a book about love. And he's just like, oh, yes, love, the woman I saw last night. Yes. And he comes to the conclusion that the safest way for him to continue on and to not have to deal with these lustful thoughts anymore is to never see her again. And he's like, I've done it, I'm cured. So they leave the library, and there's a commotion, and they go and they find Salvatore and the woman that he had sex with last night have been captured. They've been discovered, and Bernard comes out, and he sees Salvatore holding the cat, who promptly escapes from him. He's holding some broken eggs that look like yellow bile, and the woman is holding a beheaded hen that hasn't been plucked yet. And so, of course, being the sensible and logic man that Bernard is, he's like, witchcraft! Oh, these people, they're committing satanic deeds. The cat and the hen, or really it's the cat and the cock. They're used together in witchcraft and satanic deeds. And oh, these people, she's a witch. She must be burned at the stake, and we will discover the truth from this guy. Take him in and imprison him, and we will torture the truth out of him, because everybody knows that when you torture somebody, you get nothing but the truth out of them. And Adso, needless to say, is remarkably upset about this, because this is a woman that he has fallen in lust with, that he is watching ostensibly being condemned to death by Pyre.
Well, I don't want to say it's like wholly that. I mean, that is a healthy portion of it, but he does like it's like if it was, I don't know. I think there is a certain benevolent element to it. It's an infatuation more than just that, you know?
I think that's what he's telling himself to make him feel better.
Maybe, but I don't know. I think that the fact that it upsets him to the degree that it does, I think, is indicative of maybe more profound feelings. But your point is taken either way.
Yeah. So William stops Adso from trying to intervene, basically saying her fate's been sealed. There's nothing we can do about it. And yeah, they
saving
basically
him in the process, by the way.
Huh?
And saving Adso in the process, because if Adso tries to do something in that moment, because he would immediately get implicated and swept up in all this.
Yeah, it's just kind of it's just a shitty situation. It can't really be helped. Bernard is a villain. He's an evil man. He does all of this under the guise of Christianity, but in actuality, he's just an evil man that seeks to do power and do his nefarious things. Like, he just not a good dude. Like, nothing really Christ-like about him. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, they both get taken away, Salvatore and the woman, and Ubertino coming in clutch right here at the end, just to prove how much of a dumbass he is. Comes up to Adso and he's like, "The fact that she's beautiful means that she's a witch." And it's like, read the room, Ubertino. Like, really, dude? You're gonna come in here with your stupid, like, incel behavior and just really kind of, throw some gasoline on the fire that's already burning in Adso's heart? Like, what a dickhead.
Ubertino was the original incel.
He really is, dude. Like he's the one that needed to, truly he was the one that needed to walk in on Salvatore and get a little action the night before, because maybe it would have done him some good. He would have had that post-nut clarity and been like, man, I've kind of been a dickhead, haven't I?
It's,
like, dude needs to get laid, straight up. Like, he just needs to get laid. And that's probably a problem with a lot of people from this time period, is they just needed to get laid. And they just, because of their piety, they just refuse to. So, like, you have all of these evil dudes that just needed the touch of a woman to make them feel a little good about themselves, and maybe they wouldn't be such hateful, spiteful pieces of shit. I don't know, it's just me, though.
Yeah, there's just, and, this whole section is very, this last section is very tragic, in a way. Just this poor girl who is essentially trying to, I think it's essentially, I forget where it's mentioned, but she is, the reason she's doing all of these things, and agrees to do them, is to get just literal scraps to bring back to her younger brothers that are starving.
Was that actually confirmed, or was that just some sort of like hypothetical of like, oh, she might have brothers that she needs to feed?
I thought it was confirmed, but I could be wrong. But either way,
the point still stands.
Like, she would not be doing this without being in dire straits. So she is essentially being doubly punished, and triply punished, because now she's she is now about to face the Inquisition. And one thing that is important here to note that is that they're talking to Salvatore like they're not saying, okay, and we're going to kill you too. That like, I mean, not that anybody should
No,
be
because
killed,
he's
but
a
the point
man.
is, yeah, he is not going to be, he's not going to face the same level of cruelty and scrutiny that she is, and I think that is a very intentionally done thing by Echo. I mean, it's the reality, but it was intentionally done by Echo here to kind of show like this sort of this ongoing current of the destructive and corrosive influence of misogyny on the Catholic Church and society writ large at this time.
You know, I gotta say, the worst part about this situation with Salvatore and the woman from the village, the worst part has got to be the hypocrisy.
I would have thought it was the torture.
But yeah, it's just insane, man. Like, just terrible, terrible people. And yeah, it just kind of goes to show this absolute, like you said, the misogyny, the hypocrisy of it all, to where this woman, she's just here. She's the victim. She's 100% the victim. 100, like, just completely. There's no like other way around this. She's someone who feels like she has to sell her body in order to survive. Just nothing she can do in order to get just the food that she needs, if either to um, feed herself or feed her family. She has to have sex with these shitty monks, and on top of that, to now get lumped in, just, wrong place, wrong time, with this super zealotous, sadist, evil man who is quick to point the heretical finger rather than ask a question. He's very much burn the witch first, ask questions later. And it's just, it sucks, man. This poor woman. They're gonna kill that poor woman, man.
I'm leaving out a little bit of hope that William will be able to unravel these things, but who knows?
I don't think so,
I,
and my reason why is because they're going to get the answers they want out of Salvatore. And he's going to walk away. He's going to walk away well, maybe not scot-free, but he's not going to get burned at the stake. They already said he's not going to get burned at the stake. They're basically just like, oh, he will find his penance. The abbot will have the just punishment for him. We'll kill the woman, though. But they're gonna get what they want from Salvatore. Bernard wants him to call her a witch and a heretic, and how this was all her idea, and Satan was working through her and trying to do Satan deeds, and go against the righteousness of God. He's gonna get those answers from Salvatore because those are the ones that he wants. Because everybody knows that torture gives you the answers you want, not the truth.
I think that is definitely true. In that respect, I'm hopeful though, because it does feel like they're positioning, like, because of the direct barbs that Bernard is throwing at William, being like, am I not right that blah blah blah, blah, and he's trying to get him, he's trying to goad him, he's trying to call into question him and his past as an inquisitor, so I feel like there's going to be something. And that remains to be seen there. I'm not certain, but I mean, she might still die anyway. But I feel like this is going to be part of, and then there's yet another tragedy. She dies as part of the larger chess game between William and Bernard. But it's just, I don't know. I feel like this is either going to be pivotal, where she's going to end up being saved, or it's going to be yet another aspect of this battle between the two of them that's going to come to represent a lot of what's important in this last section. At least that's my guess.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where we end this week. That's where we're at. That's the end of day 4. And so next week we're gonna finish this book off. Covers day 5, 6, and 7, and the epilogue.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I like I said, I think that it's kind of heating up because it feels like a lot of stuff happens, especially in the 4th chapter, that is not necessarily rawly like philosophical or theological in nature. I feel like this last section is going to probably be the most, the fastest Relatively speaking. The fastest, relatively speaking.
Yeah. But I think that's going to about do it for us today.
Yes. The podcast has ended. Go in peace and to love and to listen to podcasts.
Yep. Daniel, do you want to take us out with our last gospel hymn of the night?
Okay. Kyrie, Kyrie, Kyrie eleison. There you go.
Rate 5 stars and subscribe. You heard it here, man. It is a message from God.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
All right, take care.